I want to say good afternoon to everyone. My name is Patrick Gilbert, and I'm part of the Lone Star College Tomball Center for Civic Engagement. I'm a professor here, and this year we have to do things a bit different because we can't be on campus with a candidate forum. We had to move our candidate forum to a virtual format, and we limited our forum to the congressional candidates for the United States House of Representatives 10th Congressional District. We have challengers Mike Siegel and Roy Eriksen. Mr. McCall couldn't make it. His office did indicate that he would chime in if he had time in his congressional schedule to do so. But nonetheless, we're still going to move forward because we still have two candidates. We'll move forward even if we only had one because we want to give the voters the opportunity to hear from them. So I want to go first to Mr. Siegel. I before the recording started, we figured out who was going to go first in our own special way virtually. So I want to start with Mr. Siegel, and you have an opportunity to introduce yourself to the voters. And I want to keep it at about 2 minutes. I can't nudge you from here, but I want to keep it at about 2 minutes to each candidate, and then we'll keep it flowing. And the whole thing will last about an hour. So go ahead, Mr. Siegel.
Sounds good, Professor, and thanks so much for putting this together. And I'll look for your verbal cues if I'm going on too long here. But I'm Mike Siegel, Democratic nominee for Congress here in the Texas 10th Congressional District, which basically stretches from northwest of Austin all the way out to the Houston suburbs of Katy, Cypress, and Tomball. And I'd be honored to be representing students and anyone else watching this event today. Civil rights lawyer, city attorney for the city of Austin, and really been serving the people first in the classroom, fighting for this idea that in the American dream, everyone should have the ability to access a wonderful education and to succeed in school and then have opportunity in the society. And then more recently, a rights lawyer fighting to make sure that everyone has a fair shot at their workplace, representing women who suffer discrimination, whistleblowers who face retaliation after reporting corruption. And then as a city attorney, taking on a number of important civil rights cases, making sure renters had good quality housing, even challenging the governor when they passed an anti-immigrant law in 2017 here in Texas, sent a bill forward and leading that fight on behalf of our immigrant community. And I'm running for Congress to provide real representation to the people of this district. The Republican incumbent, Mr. McCall, hasn't held a public event in 11 years. He hasn't been accessible to the people. He hasn't been accountable for his decisions, for example, to vote 46 times to cut our health care, even during a pandemic, to support the lawsuit that would take away protections for pre-existing conditions. And on down the line, I feel like he's been on the wrong side of the people and has been more concerned with his donors and his corporate benefactors than representing the people. And big picture, I think we're in a time of overlapping crises with massive unemployment, a health pandemic, even assaults on our democracy, in addition to the threat of climate change, especially what's happening on the West Coast right now. And we need leadership that's going to fight for the people to make sure that we're taking on climate change with a national jobs program to build a more renewable economy, making sure everyone has health care, making sure we're guaranteeing the right to vote and bringing back the Voting Rights Act. I want to support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act in 2021. So I'd be honored to represent the students and school community here at Lone Star College, and I look forward to the conversation we have today.
All right, thank you, Mr. Siegel. Mr. Eriksen, 2 minutes to introduce yourself and explain why you're running for Congress.
Sure. Can you hear me okay? Just want to make sure we're good. Yes. Okay. So my name is Roy Eriksen. I am the Libertarian candidate for running for TX-10. I kind of come from a little more, I'd say, modest background. I'm not a lawyer. I've not held anything, not been in public service except being a teacher for a couple of years. But I have a very diverse background. I come from middle-class America. I see on a daily basis what people in our district are going through. I run a self-funded, I'm a self-funded candidate, so I don't take outside donations from corporations or any kind of PACs or other organizations. I don't believe in that. I believe that the people should really be able to see who the candidates are at face value, what their true values are, what they're going to do. And I think I can bring that all to the table. I look at a number of things as well. Let me backtrack first. My background is I've been an entrepreneur. I've been a teacher for a couple of years, and I've been in the consulting and banking and finance industries prior to that. So I'm pretty knowledgeable. I consider myself pretty knowledgeable on a number of different issues. And one of the things that really intrigued me about getting on the ballot is just the fact that my decisions aren't, and my policies and stances aren't made by other organizations that try to influence me. So I stand by what professionals, what's needed out in the community, talking to professionals and business owners, seeing what they need, talking to the residents and the constituents of the district, just to find out really what their needs and wants are. And through that process, I've come to find out that the two-party system is very broken, and that change is readily needed. So what I'm bringing to the table is basically fighting for the liberties of the constituents of our constituency, and at the same time being a physically responsible in how we spend money and how we use our federal funds. So I think there's some distinct differences as far as what my candidacy is like compared to the other, the Democrat, Mr. Siegel and Representative McCall. That kind of gives you a little bit of background about myself and why I'm running.
Okay, thank you both. So I want to stem the questions for this forum, and also let me say for those who are also attendees that I can see on the list, but I know that the panelists may or may not be able to see them, but I can definitely see who's on. I would encourage you all to submit questions via the Q&A section, and then I have some questions submitted by some students that I'm going to get to a little later on. But I want to shape this around the Pew Research Center's survey. They said the economy is the top issue for voters in the 2020 election, but they also listed healthcare, Supreme Court appointments, the coronavirus, violent crime, foreign policy, guns, race and ethnicity, immigration. All those had over 50%, by the way. Economic inequality, climate change, and abortion. So I want to kind of go down and talk about not all of them, but a number of them. So the first thing is the economy. Unemployment rate currently, as I found, is about 8%. The national debt is about $26 trillion. What ideas do you have, Mr. Siegel, to help improve the economy?
The economy is completely broken, and really, to the extent that our economy is serving anyone, it's serving the most well-connected and wealthiest individuals and corporations. And that's reflected even in our response to this crisis we're in right now, with 40 million newly unemployed, as well as all these folks who are suffering because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the government has been more focused on lending trillions of dollars to well-connected companies and not making sure working people have the basics to succeed in life. And whether that's keeping food on the table, keeping a roof over our heads. And so to me, what I would like to see, I think this is a moment similar to during the Great Depression, when we have a massive gap between rich and poor in this country, many millions of unemployed Americans, and our response under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was to invest in the American people and put people to work rebuilding the country. That's when we built so much of our electrical infrastructure, our flood control infrastructure. So many projects around this country were built during that New Deal era. And it was using those federal resources to put people to work and grow the economy. And so that's what I'd like to see right now. In terms of the COVID pandemic, we could be employing Americans, especially newly unemployed Americans, to be contact tracers to help us slow the spread of this virus. We could be building up our crumbling infrastructure, especially here in Harris County, where we have inadequate flood control infrastructure. We could be hiring people and basically commissioning major projects to put people to work, to make us safer and stimulate the economy. And on so many issues, whether it's cleaning up pollution, whether it's taking care of our students, building good public schools, I feel like the federal government could be guaranteeing jobs. I am concerned about the deficit, but what I'm most concerned about the deficit is that we've gone into debt for tax cuts for the wealthy. Under President Trump and Michael McCall voted for this, we gave basically a $2 trillion giveaway to well-connected corporations and to the wealthiest individuals. That money did not trickle down to regular working class people. These companies, they use that money to buy their own stock, pump up their own stock price. They didn't create new jobs. They didn't give their workers better healthcare plans. And so the priorities have been totally messed up. And I think, Mr. Eriksen pointed to the two-party system being broken. And I think I agree with him, the idea that our system's been captured by corporate interests. And it's the influence of all this outside money, including on political campaigns, where the priorities of the people of America here of Texas and the Texas 10th were not being heard. And so whether it's on healthcare, it's on jobs, on climate issues, unfortunately, the folks with the most money, these corporations who give to candidates like Michael McCall, are writing the ticket, and we need to change that. And so I'm committed to fighting for the people and lifting the needs of working class, working people up in the halls of Washington, D.C.
Okay, Mr. Eriksen, how about that? Do you believe that the government, or do you have any ideas on what the government should do or not do?
Well, I mean, let me address the COVID pandemic first. I am totally opposed. There are exceptions to every rule. Let me start by saying that. But coming in, the Democrats want to add $2-3 trillion of more stimulus to different things that aren't even really helpful to the COVID crisis is crazy. So it's that's one issue. This is having a piecemeal approach to coming to some compromise, to some consensus, and having a piecemeal approach to additional stimulus, I think, is probably the ideal way to go. I'm not saying that I agree with Republicans and that type of thing, but I totally disagree with adding another $3 trillion of debt to our deficit to pass for another stimulus bill, especially when things are getting better. So let me just start by saying that. Now, with that said, I agree. There needs to be some mechanisms in place to get back to work. I think the unemployment rate, while it's going down, I think we also need to look at what employment was before the COVID crisis hit, and we can have another discussion on, who was right and who was wrong as far as, or what was right and what was wrong as far as the handling of the pandemic. But the reality is, if you look at where our economy was before the pandemic started, and how it's it's creeping back. I mean, it's not back to where it was, but it's coming back. Unemployment's coming down. People are getting back into the workforce. That's a good thing. So you have to look at it. You have to look at those positives and not automatically say, "Oh, everybody is in need of a job and is in need of more money to help support their families." Money is coming back into the system. Money is getting back in the hands of families that need the help. With that said, is another round of stimulus probably necessary? Yes, at some point, another round of stimulus is necessary. I just don't think a $2 or $3 trillion price tag is the answer. As far as what we can do, as what we can do to get things going again, I mean, part of it is you just got to let things work itself out. I'm a firm believer that we're on our way to having a vaccination. I personally don't believe in hiring a bunch of people as contact tracers. Nobody wants the federal government following them and in their families, wondering what's going on and who they're around and why they're with. I mean, that's such an invasion of privacy. It's not even funny. So I really don't agree with that idea at all. But I think there is some consensus as far as, infrastructure. There's been an infrastructure conversation now for years, since President Trump took office, even probably before he took office. And I think that's a good place to start. If we're trying to get working families back, we know that our infrastructure needs improvements. That's a place where we can start getting families back to work and getting money back in the economy and back in the hands of families. I totally agree with Mr. Siegel on that. Where I disagree is there's other topics I disagree that he brought up with, as far as the environment, things like that. There are some things that we need to let the private companies handle, and I don't believe the federal government needs to get involved in the privatization of alternative energy is one of them. I don't think the federal government needs to be involved in that. I think that needs to work its way out, or work its way through the system without federal involvement. I think that's the way it's going to be most successful. And the reason for that being is that it's been proven over and over again that a Green New Deal, getting the energy out, or getting alternative energy backed by federal government, is going to increase. It's going to increase taxes on working families. So I don't think that's the solution.
Okay. I'm gonna catch up on the Green New Deal and climate change a little later, but I've got you covered with that. But let me segue into something that you did mention, and I was going to go to healthcare next, but I guess it's all tied together with the coronavirus, and I'll go back to Mr. Siegel since it's his turn. Speaking about the coronavirus, we have almost 200,000 people now who have passed away because of this. We have well over 1 million cases. What is it that the government should do to help curb this, to help slow the spread?
Who do you want to go first?
Mr. Siegel.
I'm sorry, my internet faded. Professor, would you repeat the question?
Sure. So with almost 200,000 deaths as a result of the coronavirus, and of course far more cases than that, what should the government do to help slow the spread and ultimately get rid of this?
Sure. I mean, this is absolutely top priority. And I mean, unfortunately, our government at the state level and the federal level has not been listening to scientists. I mean, the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, has the best scientists in the country, if not the world, in terms of confronting pandemics. And we didn't listen to them. So from the beginning, and this is what we still need today, because the crisis is not over, especially with the state and country continuing to open up, going back to school, all of these things that can basically lead to resurgence of the coronavirus. We need to have absolute universal access to testing, and we do need to be tracing. And so this is where I firmly disagree with Mr. Eriksen. All these countries around the world that have avoided the mass deaths that we have here in this country, and this is absurd. We're one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest nation in the world. We have the top minds in the world here. The idea that we've had nearly 200,000 deaths is obscene, and it's an absolute failure of leadership at the federal and state levels. And so we need testing to be available to everybody. The New York Times wrote up 2 people in Austin went to get a COVID test. One paid cash, was billed $200. The other to offer their insurance was billed $5,000. And this is the most basic thing you can do to slow the spread. Just determine whether you have the virus for your own health. That's the right thing for community health. And so we need universal testing, and we do need tracing, because that's what's worked in these other countries that have been able to slow the virus. We also need to make health available to every American. We spend more than any other country in the developed world on healthcare, but we have tens of millions of people who have no insurance at all, and many millions more who have complete inadequate access to care, such that they're risking bankruptcy in a serious medical event. And so the Republicans, for example, in Texas, refuse Medicaid expansion, which would bring matching federal dollars to expand healthcare. We need to make that happen here, which will keep rural hospitals open. We'll make sure that we don't have cost barriers to healthcare. And then further down the road, we do need to consider making more economic aid available to people, to make sure that you don't have to make this choice of going to an unsafe workplace and keeping food on the table. This is where I absolutely disagree with the Libertarian candidate. I do think the federal government should be continuing to pay people to stay home and be safe until the crisis is over, because nothing is more expensive than loss of life. I mean, what's the value of 200,000 dead Americans, of 15,000 dead Texans? You know, we can afford as a country, for example, $5 trillion in lending to well-connected companies. Why can't we keep the American people home and safe until this pandemic is over? And so these are the things we need: testing, tracing, universal access to healthcare. We need economic stimulus. We need to prevent foreclosures and evictions, because that's another crisis that we're on the verge of, including here in Harris County. We're on the verge of a lot of people being kicked out of their homes, which will put them more at risk for spreading this virus and contracting the virus. We also need to make sure we can open schools safely. And to the extent that we can't open schools safely, we need to make technology and high-speed internet available to students so they can learn from home. And so really, one of the things we've learned about this crisis is how interconnected we are as community members, because we're only as healthy as our least insured neighbors, but also how important the overall safety net is, including access to healthcare, access to housing, and also access to a good job to be able to earn a living and keep a roof over your heads and food on the table. All of these things matter to keeping our community healthy. And to me, we need to be reinvesting in the safety net and not propping up the most well-connected companies, but taking care of the American people.
Okay. So 62%, and this is going back to the same survey, 62% feel that the coronavirus outbreak is very important in the 2020 election. So, Mr. Eriksen, what do you feel should be done about the outbreak to slow it or anything?
Well, okay, so I will say this. I will agree with Mr. Siegel on this. I think vaccinations, if people want to go get, not vaccinations, testing, if people want to go get tested for corona or COVID, I think they should be able to have access to that. Their choice, right? And I'm hoping that he or I are in agreement of that as far as choice, and be able to and make it accessible, and make it affordable for those that maybe aren't insured or that are underinsured. Or, they don't have a good policy or don't have a good health care plan. So I can agree with him in that aspect. Where I don't agree at is, again, I'm going to stand behind what I said with regards to contact tracing. No one wants the government in their back pocket. I understand where he's coming from. I understand that there are people in our constituency that probably agree with him, but a lot of people that I've spoken to have talked to about contact tracing, they have all flat out told me that they are not going to go get tested, even if they think they have the virus, because they don't want the government in their back pocket. They think it's an invasion of their privacy. So I tend to agree with that idea. Now, where I think some of the differences is as far as healthcare. We'll get into that conversation as far as healthcare, but he addressed other things such as keep letting families stay home, and things like that. Look, the problem here is that with the government is working to get a vaccine, make that vaccine accessible. Hopefully, it comes sooner than later. I agree. We need to get people back. We need to get people back in the workforce. We need to do it safely, but we have to look at it from the big picture. He brings up other countries, and I'm assuming he's talking about our European neighbors. If you look at the percentage of people that got exposed to COVID as compared to their population, and you look at the number of people that we've had deaths as compared to the population of those countries, and you look at the number of deaths we had as compared to our population, depending on what statistics you look at, you have more cases of influenza than you do COVID. So it's when you look at the big picture and you try to there's no comparison comparing the number of people we have in our country, the population we have, and comparing it against the populations of other countries in Europe. So I kind of take that perspective as a very skewed perspective, and I don't really look at that as fact. Now, I also think one of the things I think we should also do, the federal government, I think, should also put the control back into the states as far as how to handle it. I think each state is handling it their own way. Each state has a better eye on what's going on and for their constituents inside the state. And they have better knowledge. They've got boots on the ground. They have a better knowledge as to what resources they need and what actions they can take and how to take them than the federal government does. So again, the federal government getting in the back pocket, leave it up to the states to make the decisions that's best for their citizens, not the federal government to tell us what to do. And if the states want to take into consideration CDC advisories as to how to handle it and recommendations, that's up to the states. But that should not be mandated by the federal government.
Okay, so here's a quick yes or no question, and I see we have two questions in the chat. So first question is, and this is just yes or no, did you agree with Governor Abbott's mask mandate? That's to both of you. You don't have to wait for one to go. But
No.
Yes, it should have happened sooner.
Okay. So here's a question. I think this is posed to you, Mr. Siegel, and it is, how would Houston adapt without the oil and gas jobs that will be eliminated through the Green New Deal?
Right on. Well, thank God, Your Honor, for the question, because it gives me a chance to really explain what the Green New Deal means, because this is something that's not well understood. The Green New Deal is responding to two major crises in our society. One, climate change. You know, we can see it in these flood events in the Houston area. The West Coast is on fire right now. Climate change is real. The international scientific community recognizes it. We need to take dramatic action to save hundreds of millions of lives and protect our way of life on this planet. The other major crisis is massive unemployment and the gap between rich and poor. The United States is more inequitable than ever. And you can see that with these billionaires getting richer during the pandemic and the rest of us losing money. And so with the Green New Deal, you know, the key words in the Green New Deal are New Deal. This is like what we did in the 30s and 40s in this country, where we created a national jobs program to put people to work, millions of people, building up this country, laying the foundation for decades of progress, growth of the middle class, making this country stronger so we could win World War II, defeat fascism abroad. It was an amazingly successful program. And so the Green New Deal is going to create millions of jobs, building the economy of the future. For example, making sure we have renewable energy that doesn't pollute the planet, making sure we're cleaning up pollution that hurts predominantly Black and Latino communities, especially here in the Houston area. If you think about where these refineries are located, the chemical plants, they're in working class communities where there's a disproportionate impact on Black and Latino Texans. And so we're going to clean up the pollution. We're going to create new jobs, retrofitting our electrical grid, making sure our homes and businesses are energy efficient. We're going to invest in research and technology. Now, in terms of the job losses, because that's one of the things Adriana referenced, we're losing jobs right now in Texas because of the glut of oil and gas in the international market, because of market manipulation by countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia. So these job losses are happening right now. And to address the point by Mr. Eriksen in terms of subsidies, right now we subsidize oil and gas. We don't subsidize wind, even though Texas produces more wind energy than any other state in the union. If you go by Lubbock, you think of that as oil country, you'll see the wind farms in that part of the state. And so really what we're talking about is a level playing field for renewable energy and fossil fuel energy, but really recognizing that we need to protect our planet. The cost of massive fires, massive flood events is much more than the cost of creating a transition. Now, to make sure that any affected worker is cared for, a big part of the Green New Deal is called the just transition. So a lot of workers will have new jobs, you know, electrical workers, renewable energy, there's just as many electrical jobs, if not more, than fossil fuel energy. It's true that some people who might build pipelines or operate coal plants, they're going to need new work. And so we need to take care of every single family by whether that's making sure they have a guaranteed pension or other economic assistance to make sure they can make that transition, because obviously working families shouldn't suffer as we kind of prepare for the economy of the future.
Okay, so here's her follow-up question. How would you fund the proposals you're discussing? I know you mentioned about the oil and gas industry being subsidized, but how would you fund the proposals that you're advocating?
Sure, for whether you're talking about universal health care or strong action on climate change, we actually, as the United States of America, if I can just give a very brief economics lesson, we pay for things because we print our own money. We have what's called the sovereign currency. So it's not like our household budget or the city of Houston's budget or even the state of Texas' budget where you actually have to balance it. This deficit that was referred to by the professor earlier, you know, many trillions of dollars, that's only a concern when we have something called inflation, when we have basically more money than there are productive resources. And so there are different kinds of debt. If there's one thing I can share with you, there's a big difference between giving $2 trillion to well-connected companies so they can buy their own stock. It's not economically productive. That's very different from spending $2 trillion to create jobs. Then workers basically spend that money in their community, give that to small businesses, and that creates economic growth. So the deficit by itself is not really a very strong indicator. But we fund these programs through the federal treasury, and if we use the money effectively, it's actually going to grow our economy and grow the middle class.
Okay, thank you very much. And I don't know if you wanted to respond, Mr. Eriksen, but those questions were directed towards Mr. Siegel, so I don't know if you wanted to give a quick response to them.
Yeah, I'll give a quick response. All I hear on this is dollar signs, right? It doesn't, I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to cost money to do this. And it's been proven time and time again, the Green New Deal is going to kill jobs. It's going to add to our national debt. And it's a deal breaker. I mean, there's a reason why most people think that it is crazy to even have a discussion about the Green New Deal, except for the Democrats. And that's fine. But you know, I believe as far as energy, you know, alternative energies is something that needs to be explored without a doubt. Where I believe it needs to be done is on the private sector. So the private sector, the private sector is the one that engages that. They do the R&D. It is not government run. I mean, we have to go back. I'll give you a prime example. We had this discussion, similar discussion back right after the Great Recession and President Obama took office. He was going on this huge green hike. We're going to spend, you know, billions of dollars or trillions of dollars out of you know, of all that stimulus money that was passed in Congress. And what happened? This was all for green energy. And what happened? All that money got wasted. It didn't get spent like it was supposed to. It went to, you know, he's talking about it going to large companies. Well, his own party, President Obama, took that stimulus money and the people that supported the Democratic Party, wealthy donors and wealthy corporations, all got that money and spent it frivolously, and it got wasted. So I just have a hard time buying that there's a solution without. I don't believe in increasing the federal debt, and it's been proven time and time again, or it affecting middle class workers, middle class America, and even those that are in the upper echelon of middle class. We all have to pay the price tag for that, and the price tag for that is going to be higher taxes and a bigger debt, national debt.
So let me change gears here and go to something else. So we talked about the coronavirus already, the pandemic, but some people feel that we have two pandemics going on, the other one being that we have a race problem here in the United States. So I suppose the straightforward question that I want to ask you, because it goes back and forth depending on who you ask. Mr. Siegel, do you believe we have a race problem here in the United States? And I guess you can just answer yes or no.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Mr. Eriksen?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel, do you support the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yes. And can I, this a 2-minute answer or just a yes or no?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you a follow-up about that I do want you to spend some time on. So Vice President Mike Pence was asked if he believes Black Lives Matter, and he had a little trouble answering the question. He wouldn't say that. So is that something that you would say today?
Absolutely. I support the movement for Black Lives. I've joined in the protests as much as I've been able to during this pandemic. And to me, this is part of the legacy of racism and slavery and Jim Crow in America. I mean, it's at this point, a 401-year legacy that has not been addressed fully as part of our society. We never actually had a reconstruction as was promised after the Civil War. And unfortunately, the remnants of this legacy of institutional discrimination and racism exist in our police forces. And we saw that with the murder of George Floyd, with the murder of Breonna Taylor in Louisville. The idea that police officers are allowed to operate sometimes with impunity. I mean, the officer who killed George Floyd had 18 complaints against him and was still allowed to have a badge and a gun. And so we need to have a national reckoning with racism in this country, whether it applies to housing discrimination, employment discrimination, and also police practices. We need to make sure that we eradicate racism from our policing to really fulfill that ideal of justice for all. We need to think about economic programs to create a level playing field across the races. And we also need to basically take this extremely seriously, that it's not going to happen just by, allowing the market forces to magically address these things. I'll just take one example to make this a little bit more specific. We have a Department of Justice that's charged with disrupting so-called domestic terror groups. But under the Trump administration, they've taken away programs that were designed to disrupt white supremacist organizations. And if you look at the mass shootings that have occurred in this country in recent years, it's been by white supremacist individuals. And the idea that our federal government is not disrupting these organizations that, for example, led the 17-year-old to kill 2 people in Wisconsin, that led to those events in Charlottesville where, unfortunately, the president himself said, there are good people on both sides, when one of the sides is neo-Nazis who are preaching some hateful rhetoric. This is very serious. And as a white man in this country, it's my duty to maybe step forward a little more and to say, you know what, we need to own this legacy of discrimination and that we're not fulfilling the American dream and that this is reflected in some of our law enforcement practices. And we need to take that very seriously because everyone deserves safety and security in this country, not just those with a privileged skin color.
Okay, Mr. Eriksen.
Yeah, I will say this about the Black Lives Matter movement. Where it becomes a problem for me is when, you know, Mr. Siegel talks about some of these events where there were deranged white individuals that decide to go on shooting sprees. You know, that's wrong, right? Violence is not the answer to the problem. And the same thing goes for Black Lives Matter. I am in total support of the reason why Black Lives Matter is there. I think they should kind of flip the coin and maybe do more of what Martin Luther King did during the Civil Rights Movement. I think that would be a more effective statement than the violence that we keep seeing on television. I just don't think violence is the answer, and I don't think violence is the last resort. Now, I will say I want to address these. I want to kind of touch on some of these other things, you know, that Mr. Siegel brought up. You know, the bringing in. I'm not so sure I agree with him bringing in white supremacy and all this other kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is violence is violence. There should be no violence. I don't agree. I personally, if you take a harder look at those individuals, I don't agree with what they did, but those individuals had a history of mental illness that caused that did those shootings. The people that are doing the Black Lives Matter movement, they're not mentally disturbed. They have a reason why they're getting together. They have a reason for why they are making this movement. I just have a problem where their movement becomes violent. Violence solves nothing. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement would be much more influential and beneficial if they kept the violence out.
I want to read this quote from Doc Rivers. He said it on August 25th about African Americans, and he said, "We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. We're the ones that we're denied to live in certain communities. We've been hung. We've been shot. All you do is keep hearing about theater. It's amazing why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back. It's really so sad." I want to start with you, Mr. Eriksen, and then I'm gonna work my way back because you made me think of this quote. Given what you said, you spoke a lot about the shooters having mental health issues and things like that. But from what Mr. Rivers said, it seems that the racism is causing him angst. So, what is the remedy to all of this? What is it that can be done to end the hatred and the racism? Is there something that the government can do? Is there something that you specifically advocate for in your campaigning?
Well, I think it's a number of things, right? So criminal justice reform is a start. I think, and I didn't. You went in and out as far as the quote and some of your question, but I think I got the gist of what you're asking. The criminal justice reform is something that needs to happen now. That is an answer to this problem. I can tell you right now, I have people that I consider brothers to me. I've known them for half my life. They're amazing people, and they're African American, and they have come to me privately and have told me, "Hey, look, sometimes I drive around and man, I get freaked out. You know, if a cop pulls me over, or they've talked about a circumstance where they've gotten pulled over and they were worried. That should not be happening. So there should be instances where things like, for example, some of these shootings that involved white police officers, qualified immunity should go away. That right there should be one of the number one things, that there should not be a discussion when a police officer fires on an unarmed citizen or harms an unarmed citizen. Doesn't matter race, creed, gender, nothing. There shouldn't be any the qualified immunity should go away if they're at fault. And some of the other things that you can do is like the mandatory sentence reform, where some of our offenders, the federal statute gives drug offenders higher or larger minimum sentencing than someone that had a white collar crime that stole money. So there is a lot of disparity in our criminal justice system that needs to be addressed, and there's some simple fixes. I think that like the voter felon reenfranchisement law should be passed, where felons can come back in and they can exercise their right to vote. I think, like I said, the minimum federal sentencing guidelines, and those are just, those are just two or three of the things that come into my mind, off the top of my head. But those are three very important things that we should be able to work on as a country and achieve to help solve this problem.
Okay, Mr. Siegel, your 2 minutes.
Well, I would agree with some of the common sense reforms suggested by Mr. Eriksen, but I would disagree that this is just something we can address through the criminal justice system. I mean, I think we have to first, recognize we have a problem, institutional racism. What does that mean? It permeates our entire society. So we have housing discrimination, we have unequal access to good schools, we have unequal access to health care. We have a maternal mortality rate that's sky high among African-American women here in Texas. It permeates every aspect of society, whether it's the distribution of wealth, from how healthy babies are born to how long people live. And so we need to reckon with this on a systemic level. And so to me, I'm a former public school teacher. I taught third grade, started out in Houston, Texas, taught in multiple states. I mean, it's something we have to teach in our schools. I mean, we need high quality education and to make sure that we're raising the next generations with a more open mind towards tolerance. Obviously, we're not going to flip a switch and get rid of racism. We're not going to get rid of violent white supremacist actions. But to me, first of all, we need strong schools. We need strong justice systems. But we also need to empower folks economically to make sure that, we address this gap in wealth and opportunity. I mean, when you look at these numbers, for every dollar per hour that a white man gets paid, a woman might get paid 70 cents. But a black woman might get paid 50 cents. I mean, those aren't the exact numbers, but it's essentially, you can see the legacy of discrimination everywhere. And so we need economic programs to make sure there's equal access to, for example, higher education. To me, one thing I would like to see is, can we make historically black colleges tuition free? Here at Prairie View A&M, Waller County, just next door to Lone Star College. I mean, why should students who might be descendants of slaves and folks who lived through Jim Crow, why can't we give them this a little bit of a boost to give them a more level playing field with the rest of us who grew up in more privileged circumstances? And so I think it's a comprehensive conversation. I do think we need to address racism in our criminal justice and law enforcement programs, but I think we need to look at how it permeates every aspect of our society.
Okay, thank you. Moving to the next topic. I know time is drawing short, so let me speed up a little bit. I want to talk about immigration for just a little bit. Estimates show that we have about 11 million undocumented who live here in the United States. Many of them were brought here as children and they are not familiar with their home country. So, of course, the Supreme Court had a ruling about that not long ago, but what are your ideas on how to go about with the immigration system the way we have it? Should we have a path to citizenship? I know some people on the other side of the spectrum say that we should deport. What in your mind should we do? And I want to start back with you, Mr. Siegel.
Well, yes, we should have a path to citizenship. I mean, to me, where I start is we should treat human beings with dignity and respect. And a second principle should be we should have families be united. And so to me, if we start with those ideas of human dignity and family, unity, then I think we can build our immigration system that way. So much of our system is broken for a lot of reasons. We have these quotas that are based on archaic immigration patterns. We've got intentional sabotage of the immigration system by the Trump administration under Stephen Miller, his immigration advisor. We have incredible cruelty towards families at the border with the family separation policy and these camps where kids are being held, families are being held in so-called freezers. There's just terrible aspects to the system all around. There's privatization of our immigration jails where there's actually an economic incentive for these private companies to lock people up and keep them locked up as long as possible. And so to me, we have to recognize that the lifeblood of America, the poem inscribed on the Statue of Liberty, that we're a nation of immigrants, that we're stronger when we have all of these communities and cultures together, all working together. Of course, you shouldn't necessarily have the privileges of citizenship if you're a bad actor in our community, but that's not what we're talking about by and large. We're talking about workers and families and children. And so, I think some of the easy solutions are, the DREAM Act, these young people who are brought here, yes, they should have a path to citizenship. We should stop criminalizing people who are seeking asylum at the border, give people a chance to seek refuge in this country like we have for generations. And we need comprehensive immigration reform, which means that we have to get away from this hateful rhetoric. We can't be demonizing, this president we have now is called people from African countries, use the SH word to describe those countries, describe Mexican immigrants as rapists. We got to get rid of that rhetoric and get back to the table. Our biggest trading partner here in Texas is the country of Mexico. We have an historic, obviously Texas was a part of Mexico not so long ago. So let's go back to more humane treatment of human beings and reasonable, basically negotiated compromises to make sure that everyone has a fair shot in this country.
Okay, Mr. Eriksen, your 2 minutes.
Yeah, my solution is very simple. First of all, we need to hire more attorneys to help. So those individuals or those families that are separated, that are trying to get through asylum court, we need more judges. We need more attorneys that can help get their case processed and get them expedited, get their cases expedited. I don't think they should be held in any kind of detention center or whatever you want to call it for any length of time. But with that said, I do believe in preserving our borders. I don't believe in no borders. Like every other country, we have borders too, and we need to protect our borders. And I think a border wall is increasing our border patrol and giving the border additional resources. I think is necessary to stop the flow of illegal immigration. It is a problem. Now, with that said, the solution that I have is pretty simple. The people that are in this country now, give them asylum. Don't label them as illegal alien. If they are a productive member of society, they don't have any history of criminal activity, they haven't been deported for any reason, things along those lines, give them a pathway to citizenship. Give them a green card. Let them become, let them actually, a lot of them already are productive members of society, but let them, I guess, become official productive members of society. And they're contributing into our system. They're doing everything they're supposed to be doing just like they did before, and give them a pathway to citizenship if they want it. So in other words, there are some people that don't want, they want to be able to go back and forth freely, but they want the ability to be able to go home and come back and not have to worry about anything. Give them that flexibility. If they don't want to become U.S. citizens, that's fine. That's on them. But at least allow them a green card so they can come and go freely. They can work in this country legally, live a good life, live a life like they were hoping for by coming here in the first place, that they wanted by coming here in the first place, and let them, be productive members of society and live happy here with the benefits of this country.
All right, since we're running out of time, can I limit your responses now to a minute? That way we can get through some of these and then we'll close it out. I'll get you out of here. So I had a question from a student about insulin, and they want to know what your stance is on the monopoly that is had on the insulin market and the extreme markup of insulin. So this goes back to healthcare and the cost of drugs and things like that. And of course, we knew why, I can't remember the exact details, but a vial of insulin was so expensive. So what is your position on that, and what comments do you have? We'll start with you, Mr. Siegel, for your minute.
I think it's obscene. I think everyone should be able to get their insulin, and it should be guaranteed. And the idea that these drug manufacturers think of us as profit centers trying to make money off of us instead of keeping us alive is just absurd. And so that's why I do support a universal federal healthcare program like Medicare for All. It's a complete contrast to Michael McCall, who takes tens of thousands of dollars from these pharmaceutical companies and prevents us from negotiating the prices downward. So to me, that's a no-brainer that you should have guaranteed health care and guaranteed insulin without having to break your bank.
Okay. Ms. Eriksen?
I believe affordable prescription drug coverage is a necessity. Where I disagree with, and I don't believe Medicare for All is the solution. Again, I get back to being physically responsible. That's just going to add cost to our national debt, having a Medicare for All type plan. I do believe in privatization. Now, with that said, there are ways the federal government can leverage the pharmaceutical industry, and I think you're kind of seeing some of that now. Where they can, and I think letting it privatizing healthcare and increasing competition will ultimately bring the price down. If federal government needs to, have some oversight, you know, as playing mediator, I guess that might be something to consider. But I'm in total favor of privatization and letting the system work itself out.
All right. So here's the next question. A minute to respond to this. Also, want to turn to climate change and the environment. So 2 years ago, approximately, we were told by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that we had 12 years to get our acts together before something drastic happened. And we see in California that we've had continual wildfires for a number of years. So do you have any suggestions or ideas on what should be done if you believe in climate change? You can state that in your answer too. Any ideas that you have regarding that, Mr. Siegel?
Yes, absolutely. And this is one of the, you know, with all due respect, Mr. Eriksen, the private market is not going to take care of our planet. The private market is going to extract as much profit as they can for their shareholders, not to take care of the people. And the cost of these extreme weather events and fires far exceeds what it would cost to protect our planet. And so I think our federal government, just to take the fires issue, because I only have 45 seconds or 25 seconds left, you know, we should be investing in sustainable forestry. We should be planting trees. We should be hiring people to take care of our forests. But at the same time, we need to reduce fossil fuel emissions so we're not warming the planet. We're not causing the extreme drought that makes these fires possible. And that's only going to happen with not only a strong federal response by our government, but the international community needs to take action together. So we need to work in the international community, build alliances to confront this very dangerous crisis.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eriksen?
You know, I'll just say this. I don't think I hear all the rhetoric on national news that the California wildfires are a result of global warming. I don't believe that. I mean, one of those fires started by someone popping a balloon. I mean, popping a baby announcement thing. So that, yeah, one of those firework things. So I think where you need to start out is you need to look at the local level. At the local level, the forest management, if you're going to look at California as an example, there was nothing done to manage the forest. There was nothing was cleared out like it's supposed to be on the forest floor. Nothing was done. It was prime like it has been for a lot of the other fires that have happened in California. They have started as a result of the California state government and frankly the federal government not stepping in to fulfill their role and cleaning out the forest floor to prevent or help mitigate forest fires.
Okay.
I don't think I'm not a big proponent of climate change. I can speak on that for another half hour. But yeah, that's just one example.
Okay. Well, thank you both for your participation. And there are so many more questions I want to ask, but I can't. I want to be respectful of your time. So since Mr. Siegel went first, Mr. Eriksen, I'm going to let you go first this time. And if you give just a minute to close it out, any closing statements you want to make, and if anyone wants to follow up with you and your campaign, please tell them how to do so. I'll give you a minute.
Sure. So I'll just close by this. This election is a very critical time. You've got two major parties that pretend to know how they're going to help you and help you succeed and help you be a better citizen and live a better life. And they're both in the pockets of their own donors and corporations and PACs and other people. So this is a clear time. The choice here is preserve your liberty and be physically responsible, not just for your kids, but for generations to come. And I think what you'll find out is by voting for myself, you'll find myself socially moderate on a lot of issues, but very physically conservative, looking out for your best interest. And so by working together to restore our freedoms and keep your hard work and money in your pocket, that is the forefront and really why I'm running for CE10.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Eriksen. Mr. Siegel?
Well, thanks so much, Professor. So I'm Mike Siegel, Democrat for Congress here in the Texas 10th, former school teacher, civil rights lawyer, running up on a platform of healthcare for everyone, national jobs programs. I want debt relief for students, and I want a more fair and equitable society. And I've built a campaign that's really powered by the people, not by corporations. Don't take a dollar of corporate money, but we've built a really broad movement. And I will say that the students at Lone Star, y'all can make the difference in this race. I mean, if young people get out and vote, we can change our government, we can change our country, and maybe restore some common decency. And so I'd love to have your support. If you'd like to get involved, if you can spell my last name right, that's the key, Siegel. So if you put my Siegel into Google, siegelfortexas.org, you can sign up to volunteer. We'd love to have you, and thanks so much for this event.
Yeah, and I'll just real quick just chime in. If you want to reach out to me, it's info@Roy Eriksen, ERIKSEN.com. And you can also see our website as well at www.royeriksen.com.
Great. Thank you very much. And I wish both of you the best of luck. I'm sorry Mr. McCall's campaign couldn't chime in, but I really appreciate both of you coming, and just have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Take care.